Pam Bondi stepped out of the taxi and looked up at the grand hotel before her. The towering glass windows reflected the late afternoon sun, and the entrance shimmered with polished gold and brass. She had stayed in her fair share of hotels before, but something about this one felt larger than life. The doorman tipped his hat politely and she returned a small smile. Inside, the lobby was alive with movement. Staff bustled about wheeling luggage, taking guests' coats, and checking people in. Pam noticed the faint scent of fresh flowers mixed with the subtle aroma of coffee from the cafe in the corner. She took a moment to let the atmosphere sink in, her eyes scanning the elegant chandeliers, the marble floors, and the soft lighting that made the space feel warm despite its size. A young bellman approached her with a polite nod. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to the Grand Plaza Hotel. May I take your bags?" Pam handed him her suitcase and he rolled it smoothly toward the elevator. "Thank you," she said, her tone calm and polite. She noticed the way he glanced at her once, almost as if sizing her up, then quickly turned his attention to the next guest. She didn't think much of it. She had learned over the years that people often made snap judgments. Some underestimated her and some overestimated her, and neither bothered her much. At the front desk, a receptionist greeted her with a bright but slightly distracted smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," Pam replied, giving her name. The receptionist typed on her computer, her fingers moving quickly. She looked up, her expression polite but not particularly warm. "Yes, we have you here for 3 nights in a deluxe room. Would you like a high floor or a low floor?" Pam considered for a moment. "A high floor, please," she said. She noticed a faint flicker of surprise cross the receptionist's face, as if her request required a moment of thought, and then the usual, practiced smile returned. While the receptionist finished the check-in process, Pam's gaze wandered across the lobby. She watched a group of young women taking selfies near the fountain, a man in a suit making urgent phone calls, and a family laughing as a small child chased a bird across the marble floor. It was a lively scene and she felt a quiet sense of amusement. She had spent enough time in busy places to notice the little details that often went unseen by others. The receptionist handed her the key card. "Your room is on the 15th floor, room 1507. The elevators are to your left." Pam nodded politely and thanked her. She followed the bellman to the elevator, noticing that the staff continued their duties without much acknowledgement of her presence. She could feel the subtle undercurrent of underestimation in the air. They treated her like any other guest, not realizing who she was or the presence she carried naturally. It wasn't offensive, it was just an observation. Some people simply didn't notice what mattered until it mattered to them. As the elevator doors closed, Pam pressed the button for the 15th floor. The small space was silent except for the soft hum of the motor. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror, straightened her jacket, and smoothed her hair. It wasn't the first time she had walked into a place where people assumed she was ordinary. She had learned long ago that the best way to handle it was with calm composure and quiet confidence. When the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, the hallway stretched out with soft carpet underfoot and gentle lighting overhead. Pam followed the bellman to her room. He fumbled slightly with the keycard at the door, a hint of nervousness in his hands. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. "It's okay," she said. "Take your time." Once inside, she set her suitcase down and looked around. The room was spacious, with large windows overlooking the city skyline. The furniture was modern but comfortable, and the soft glow of the lamps created a welcoming atmosphere. She walked over to the window, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Even though the hotel staff had not yet noticed who she was, she could see the potential for making a positive impression if the situation arose. After settling in briefly, she unpacked a few essentials and placed her belongings neatly. Pam always preferred order over chaos, believing that a calm environment made clear thinking easier. She took a deep breath and thought about the next few hours. There was a meeting she had to attend, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet observation. She listened to the distant hum of traffic below and the occasional murmur of voices from the hallway. She had learned to find meaning in small details, how people moved, how they reacted to situations, and how they treated those they assumed were unremarkable. Later, she decided to explore the hotel. She walked down the hallway, noticing small touches that revealed the staff's pride in their work. The fresh flowers in every corner, the neatly stacked towels, the attention to cleanliness in every space. Yet even with all these details, there was a sense that the staff had underestimated her. They assumed she would blend into the background, a guest who would silently enjoy the amenities without interaction. Pam entered the hotel lounge, a warm space filled with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. A few guests were scattered throughout, some reading, others engaged in quiet conversation. She approached the bar, where a bartender polished glasses with a clean cloth. "Good afternoon," she said with a smile. "Could I get a coffee, please?" The bartender nodded and began preparing her order. Pam leaned slightly on the counter, casually observing the room. She noticed how the staff interacted with each other, the way they responded to guest requests, and the subtle hierarchies that existed behind the scenes. She didn't need to assert herself yet. Observation was just as powerful as action, and she had a talent for noticing what others overlooked. Her coffee arrived, perfectly prepared, and she thanked the bartender. She moved to a seat near the window and took a sip, letting herself relax for a moment. Yet even in this calm, she remained aware. She could feel the quiet assumptions around her, the way the staff continued their routine without recognizing the presence of someone who could change the dynamic, if given the chance. As the afternoon passed, Pam noticed small signs that would normally go unnoticed. A guest frowning at a room service menu, a staff member struggling with a broken luggage cart, a maintenance worker debating with a colleague over a minor issue in the hallway. Each scene told a story, and she absorbed it all silently, her mind already thinking several steps ahead. By the time evening approached, Pam returned to her room to freshen up before her meeting. She looked around her space once more, noting the efficiency of the room setup and the hotel's attention to detail. Yet she could not ignore the quiet sense of underestimation. It wasn't a challenge yet, but she knew the moment would come when she could show that she was far from ordinary. Pam dressed simply but elegantly, ready to step out. She left the room with a sense of purpose, walking down the hallway with measured steps. She carried herself with quiet confidence, not loud or flashy, but firm enough that it could not be ignored. As she passed the staff along the way, she noticed brief, subtle glances, some curious, some indifferent. None of them yet knew the impact she would have in the hours to come, but she was ready to reveal it in her own way. She reached the lobby once again, the lights now dimmed slightly for evening. Guests were arriving for dinner, and staff moved efficiently, still unaware of the presence of someone who would soon leave a mark on their day. Pam paused near the fountain, taking a deep breath and letting herself absorb the atmosphere one last time before stepping into the world outside the hotel, prepared to navigate the challenges ahead with calm intelligence and understated strength. She smiled to herself, a quiet, knowing smile. She knew the evening would bring surprises, and she was ready for them. Pam Bondi had arrived, and whether the staff realized it yet or not, they were about to witness someone who could quietly change everything. The hotel had a quiet hum that evening, though it was far from empty. Guests wandered between the lobby, the restaurant, and the conference rooms, some chatting quietly, others absorbed in their phones. Pam Bondi had just stepped out of the elevator and noticed a small commotion near the banquet hall. A group of staff were gathered around a clipboard, their voices low but tense. She paused, curiosity nudging her forward. A young event coordinator looking flustered was speaking rapidly to a bellman. "No, that's not right. The tables were supposed to be set for 50, not 45. And the flowers. Someone forgot the centerpieces for table 3. This is not acceptable." Pam watched from a short distance. Her eyes scanned the room and the hallway leading into the banquet area. She could see the subtle ways the staff were trying to manage the situation. A waiter moving chairs hastily, another carrying a tray with an unsure expression, and someone else fumbling with a stack of napkins. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Without announcing herself, Pam approached slowly, her movements calm, deliberate. She didn't need to demand attention. Her presence had a way of making people take notice. The event coordinator glanced at her briefly and returned to speaking, assuming Pam was just another guest passing by. Pam waited silently, absorbing the scene. She noticed things the staff had missed. One table was too close to a pillar, making it difficult for guests to sit comfortably. The placement of chairs around another table would make it awkward for servers to bring dishes. A small cluster of centerpieces had been set too low, blocking the view across the table. These were minor details to most, but to Pam, they were essential to creating a smooth experience. The bellman struggled with a cart full of decorations. It wobbled dangerously as he moved toward the tables, and a waiter had to catch it before it toppled. Pam stepped forward casually. "Excuse me," she said softly, not interrupting aggressively. "Would it help if I gave you a hand with the setup?" The bellman blinked, surprised. I guess—" "Yes, ma'am," he stammered. Pam crouched slightly to lift a light tray of centerpieces. Her movements were steady, practiced, and careful. She arranged the flowers on the tables, adjusting them just enough to create balance. She didn't make a show of it. She simply worked with quiet confidence, noticing which arrangements looked off and making subtle improvements. Other staff members began to notice her involvement. Some seemed unsure whether to intervene. Others appeared intrigued. The event coordinator, still flustered, finally paused mid-sentence and looked at her. "Are you helping?" she asked, her tone a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Yes," Pam said simply. "I noticed a few things that might make the setup smoother for the guests." There was a moment of silence. Then, without waiting for permission, Pam moved to another table where the chairs were unevenly spaced. She adjusted them, making sure each was perfectly aligned. A server who had been struggling with a stack of menus watched quietly, then began helping her, following her lead. Pam's approach was neither commanding nor demanding. She simply worked with precision, allowing the staff to see the difference small adjustments could make. It was not about control. It was about creating a better experience for everyone involved. Her calm presence seemed to have a ripple effect. The once tense staff began to move more efficiently, subtly guided by her example. The event coordinator, still unsure, finally approached her. "I didn't expect you to step in," she said. "Are you familiar with event setups?" Pam smiled gently. "I've attended enough events to know what works and what doesn't. Sometimes the details make all the difference." The coordinator hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. If you can help with table 6, that would be great." Pam moved to the next table, noticing immediately that the centerpiece was too large, blocking conversation across the table. She replaced it with a smaller arrangement she found nearby, placing it carefully in the center. She adjusted chairs and made a mental note to ask about lighting near the buffet area, where shadows might affect the presentation of food. While she worked, she listened. She overheard the young bellman complaining softly about not having enough staff for the evening's event. Pam glanced at him and said, "Have you tried delegating some of these tasks to others who aren't busy with the buffet? Sometimes sharing small responsibilities makes a big difference." He looked at her, slightly confused, but then nodded slowly and walked off to ask another staff member for assistance. Within moments, the tension began to ease. Tables were aligned, centerpieces looked balanced, and the staff moved with purpose instead of frantic energy. Pam noticed a waiter struggling with a tray of glasses. She stepped in again, taking a few glasses and arranging them neatly on the serving table. The waiter gave her a grateful glance, clearly relieved. It was in these small moments, these unnoticed struggles, that Pam's influence quietly reshaped the environment. By the time the banquet hall was fully prepared, a noticeable difference had emerged. The room looked polished, organized, and inviting. Staff who had been tense and worried now moved with calm determination. The coordinator, standing near the entrance, couldn't help but smile, though she tried to hide it. Pam stepped back, observing the scene from a distance. She didn't need recognition. The improvement was its own reward. Yet she could see the change in the staff's demeanor. They were no longer just rushing to fix problems. They were aware, attentive, and more confident. A few staff members approached her quietly. "Thank you," one said. "We didn't know how to handle it all at once, but your suggestions, they helped a lot." Pam shook her head gently. "It wasn't just me. You all did the work. I just noticed a few things you might have missed." She smiled at the subtle humility in her voice, and the staff seemed to understand. It wasn't about showing off or proving superiority. It was about making things better. Later, as Pam returned to the lobby, she noticed a few guests entering the hotel, unaware of the earlier commotion. Some paused briefly to glance at the elegant setup in the banquet hall through the glass doors. The atmosphere was calm and inviting, exactly as it should be for an evening event. Pam walked past the front desk, where the receptionist looked up from her computer and gave her a small nod. Pam returned it politely, not mentioning the work she had done. The staff had not yet fully realized the extent of her presence, and she didn't need to point it out. Often, the quiet influence made a more lasting impression than loud declarations ever could. She moved to a corner chair in the lobby, picking up a magazine and flipping through it casually. Yet her mind was still alert, processing what had happened in the banquet hall. She reflected on how small oversights could create tension and how a calm, observant approach could turn a stressful situation into a manageable one. It was a reminder that intelligence and composure often mattered more than titles or appearances. While she sat, she noticed a maintenance worker struggling with a broken lamp in the hallway. Without hesitation, she walked over and offered to hold it steady while he fixed the wiring. "Thanks," he muttered, surprised by the offer. Pam simply nodded, holding the lamp until it was secure. This pattern continued throughout the evening. She moved quietly, noticing small problems before they became bigger issues. Guests passed by her, unaware of the subtle impact she had on the hotel staff. Some staff glanced at her with curiosity, others with quiet admiration, though most did not yet recognize the full extent of her capabilities. By the time night fell, the hotel was running smoothly. The banquet hall glowed softly, guests were arriving without issue, and the staff moved with confidence instead of uncertainty. Pam returned to her room feeling satisfied but not needing acknowledgement. The evening had proven something important. Quiet observation, strategic thinking, and calm action could change outcomes more than forceful intervention ever could. As she closed the door behind her, she allowed herself a small smile. She had entered a hotel where she had been underestimated, and within hours she had quietly altered the course of the evening. Not through authority, not through demands, but through careful attention, empathy, and calm competence. Pam knew this was only the beginning. The hotel staff had yet to fully realize who they had encountered, and the night was far from over. Challenges would come, and she was ready. Every moment of observation, every subtle intervention, had been a step toward a larger understanding of how people reacted under pressure, and she had learned more about them in a few hours than they realized. As she prepared for the next day, Pam reflected on the delicate balance between influence and humility. The staff had been unaware at first, underestimating her presence. By the end of the evening, they had begun to see her differently, not as a guest who simply passed through, but as someone whose quiet insight could make a real difference. She rested that night with a sense of calm purpose. The hotel had underestimated her, and she had responded not with force but with clarity and quiet action. The lessons of the evening would ripple outward, and tomorrow she would encounter new challenges. But for now, the first test had been met, and met with grace. Pam Bondi's evening had shown her that influence did not always need to be loud. Often, the most profound impact came from observing carefully, understanding deeply, and acting thoughtfully. The hotel staff would soon learn that sometimes the people they overlooked. The next morning, Pam Bondi awoke to the gentle light streaming through the curtains of her room. She stretched and took a deep breath, feeling the quiet calm that had settled over her since the previous evening. Even though the banquet had gone smoothly, she knew the day ahead would bring new challenges. Hotels, especially ones as busy as this, had a rhythm all their own, and she had learned to read it quickly. After a quick breakfast in her room, she decided to take a walk around the hotel to observe the morning activity. As she stepped into the lobby, she noticed staff moving with a different energy than the day before. There was still the usual bustle, but the subtle tension that had marked the previous evening was gone. The staff now seemed more coordinated, though some looked a little uncertain, as if they were aware of the subtle changes from last night but could not yet place them. Pam's attention was drawn to the concierge desk. A guest was speaking rapidly, gesturing toward a luggage cart that had somehow been misplaced. The staff member at the desk looked overwhelmed, apologizing repeatedly and trying to resolve the situation. Without interrupting, Pam walked closer and observed quietly. She noticed that the cart had been left near a corner where guests were walking, making it difficult for the bellman to maneuver. "Excuse me," she said softly to the concierge. "If you move the cart closer to the back hallway, it will give the bellman more space to work without blocking the main area." The concierge blinked at her, surprised by the suggestion, but nodded and quickly adjusted the placement of the cart. Within moments, the flow of traffic in the lobby improved. Pam smiled gently, appreciating how a small change could make a big difference. She continued her walk, noting a few other minor issues that could create problems if left unattended. A maintenance worker was adjusting a lamp in the hallway, but he seemed to be struggling with the wiring. Pam approached and offered her hands to steady the fixture while he worked. "Thanks," he muttered, looking slightly amazed at her practical skill. Pam simply nodded and let him continue, showing that she could contribute without taking over or drawing attention. By mid-morning, Pam found herself in the back area of the hotel, near the staff's operational space. Here, the real workings of the hotel were visible: carts filled with linens, stacks of plates and silverware, and a flurry of activity as staff prepared for checkouts and arrivals. A young housekeeper seemed frustrated, juggling multiple tasks and trying to remember instructions from different supervisors. Pam paused and observed quietly, noticing that the system was not as efficient as it could be. "Would it help if we organized the carts by floor?" she asked gently. The housekeeper looked up, slightly startled. Then it would be easier to deliver items quickly without backtracking," Pam added. The housekeeper nodded slowly, impressed by the practical suggestion. "That actually makes a lot of sense," she said. Pam smiled, not for praise, but because she could see the immediate improvement in efficiency that the change would bring. As the morning wore on, Pam continued to move through the hotel, subtly observing and offering assistance where it was needed. She noticed that staff who had been unsure yesterday were beginning to watch her closely, curious about her quiet competence. Some offered her small smiles of acknowledgement. Others followed her suggestions without hesitation, though they still did not fully realize who she was. In the restaurant, she saw a server struggling to manage a large party. Orders were mixed up, drinks delayed, and the guests were beginning to show signs of impatience. Pam approached calmly and suggested a minor adjustment in the way the servers handled the tables, pointing out that grouping tasks by proximity could save time and reduce confusion. The server nodded and implemented her suggestion, and almost immediately the service became smoother. The guests, unaware of the guidance behind the improvement, continued to enjoy their meal without further issue. Pam's influence was quiet but growing. She didn't make announcements or demand attention, yet her observations and small interventions were shaping the hotel's operations. Even staff who had initially underestimated her began to recognize her presence, sensing that she had a way of seeing things others missed. Around noon, she was invited to a small meeting with the event coordinator and a few managers. A last-minute change had arisen. A VIP guest was arriving unexpectedly, and the hotel had to accommodate additional requests. Staff were scrambling to adjust the schedule and seating arrangements. Pam listened attentively as the team discussed their concerns. Once again, she noticed small but important details that had been overlooked. The VIP seating was placed too close to a noisy hallway, and the room's lighting would make photographs difficult. She suggested moving the seating slightly and adjusting the lighting, explaining how the changes would improve comfort and presentation. The team followed her guidance, implementing the adjustments quickly and efficiently. Throughout the afternoon, Pam continued to assist in subtle ways. She helped a bellman carry luggage up a difficult staircase when the elevator was momentarily out of service. She offered guidance to a young front desk clerk on how to manage a sudden surge of check-ins, providing tips on prioritization without taking over the situation. Each action was small, practical, and effective, but cumulatively, they had a noticeable impact on the hotel's operations. Pam also observed the human side of the staff. She noticed the stress etched on a security guard's face, the nervous energy of a new server trying to remember table numbers, and the quiet frustration of a housekeeper dealing with last-minute changes. She made a point to offer a kind word or a small gesture of support, understanding that encouragement often mattered as much as practical solutions. By late afternoon, the hotel was running smoothly. Guests moved through the lobby, restaurant, and conference areas without issue. Staff who had been tense and uncertain earlier were now coordinated and confident. Pam observed the subtle shift with satisfaction, knowing that the change had not come from authority, but from careful observation, practical action, and human understanding. She returned to the lobby for a brief moment, taking a seat near the fountain. A few guests passed by, pausing briefly to admire the elegance of the space. She noticed the way staff moved, now with a sense of purpose rather than anxiety. The young bellman who had struggled earlier gave her a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of the difference she had made. Pam allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had entered a hotel where she had been underestimated, and in less than 24 hours she had quietly transformed the way staff approached their work. She knew that influence was often most effective when it was subtle, when it encouraged others to rise to their potential, rather than relying solely on authority or recognition. Her afternoon was interrupted by a call from the concierge. A guest was requesting a special arrangement for a meeting room, something that had not been anticipated. Pam listened carefully, asking a few clarifying questions and noting the details. She walked to the meeting room herself, quietly guiding staff on the best way to set up the space. Tables were rearranged, chairs aligned, and equipment placed efficiently. When she stepped back, the room looked prepared, professional, and welcoming. Throughout the day, Pam continued to demonstrate the balance between competence and humility. She never demanded recognition, and she never imposed herself unnecessarily. Yet her presence influenced the staff, subtly reshaping their approach and improving the hotel's operations. They began to see her not just as a guest, but as someone who understood how things worked and how to make them better. As evening approached, the hotel prepared for another event. Pam observed from a distance as staff moved through the halls, placing final touches and checking arrangements. She noticed minor details that could still be improved and offered small, precise suggestions. Adjust the position of a centerpiece here, move a chair slightly there, check the lighting near the stage. Each recommendation was practical, easily implemented, and made a noticeable difference. By the time the event began, the hotel was running like a well-oiled machine. Guests were comfortable, staff were confident, and the space looked impeccable. The team, though not fully aware of who Pam Bondi was, had begun to recognize the value of her presence. They watched her quietly, curious and a little cautious, sensing that she had a way of seeing what others overlooked and acting effectively without drawing attention to herself. Pam stood to the side, observing the success quietly. She didn't need applause or thanks. The satisfaction came from seeing the environment improve, and knowing that the staff were now working with more confidence and clarity. She had quietly guided them, helping them see what they could accomplish without taking over. As the night drew on, she returned to her room once again, reflecting on the day's events. She thought about the small interventions, the quiet guidance, and the subtle encouragement she had offered. Each action, though minor on its own, had combined to create a meaningful difference. She smiled to herself, knowing that influence did not always require authority or loud declarations. Often, the most lasting impact came from careful observation, thoughtful action, and respect for those you worked with. Pam Bondi's second day at the hotel had proven an important truth: competence paired with humility, and observation paired with... The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the hotel lobby, painting the marble floor in soft gold. Pam Bondi walked through the entrance, her steps steady and unhurried. Today, she sensed, would be different. The staff had begun to notice her presence, though most still did not fully understand who she was. There was a subtle tension in the air, not the anxious kind from yesterday, but a quiet curiosity. People were beginning to wonder what she might do next. As she made her way to the lounge for a cup of coffee, she noticed a group of staff huddled near the back of the lobby. Voices were low, and the expressions on their faces were a mix of concern and confusion. Pam's interest piqued, and she moved closer without drawing attention. The event coordinator was speaking rapidly to a few bellmen. The VIP delegation just confirmed their arrival, and the banquet hall setup is still incomplete. The catering schedule is off, and the seating chart has changed twice already. How are we supposed to manage this? Pam's eyes scanned the scene. She could see where the breakdowns were happening. A miscommunication between the catering staff and the banquet team. Some tables in the wrong positions and a few overlooked technical details for the presentation. Most of the staff seemed overwhelmed, unsure where to start and frustrated that they could not fix everything at once. Pam stepped forward quietly. Would it help if I reviewed the plan and coordinated the setup? She asked softly. The coordinator looked at her with surprise. I suppose it couldn't hurt, she said, though her tone held a hint of skepticism. Pam moved quickly but calmly, assessing each problem one by one. She asked questions quietly, listened carefully, and offered simple, clear solutions. She began with the seating arrangement. pointing out which tables needed to be moved and suggesting slight adjustments so that all guests would have a clear view of the stage. A few bellmen and servers followed her lead, arranging chairs and tables with precision. Next, she focused on the catering schedule. Several waitstaff had been confused about the order of service, and a few dishes were ready before they could be delivered properly. Pam suggested grouping the dishes by table and staggering delivery times so that the workflow would be smoother. Her voice was calm and her instructions were precise, making it easy for the staff to follow. As she moved through the hall, she noticed a small technical problem. The lighting above the stage was too dim, which could affect both visibility and photographs. Without waiting for permission, she approached the lighting technician and explained the issue. Together, they adjusted the lights, making subtle changes that greatly improved the ambiance. The staff began to see the effect of her presence. What had seemed chaotic just moments ago was transforming into an organized, efficient system. Pam worked alongside them, neither commanding nor criticizing, simply guiding and supporting. Her quiet confidence encouraged the team to focus, and slowly, the panic and tension began to dissipate. A waiter approached her, looking uncertain. "We're not sure if we have enough staff for the VIP tables," he said. Pam nodded thoughtfully. "Let's divide the tables into smaller sections and assign one server to each. That way everyone knows exactly which tables to focus on and no one gets overwhelmed." The waiter followed her suggestion, and within minutes, the service began running smoothly. Pam continued to move around the hall, making small adjustments and offering guidance wherever needed. Every action was simple yet effective. The staff were astonished at how quickly the chaos was transforming into order. As the VIP guests began to arrive, Pam observed quietly from the side. She noticed a few minor details. A misplaced menu here, a slightly uneven chair there. With gentle adjustments, she corrected each problem before it could become noticeable to the guests. Her presence was subtle, almost invisible, yet her influence was everywhere. The event coordinator watched in awe. She had underestimated Pam, assuming she was just another guest. Now she realized that Pam's keen observation and quiet efficiency were the reason the setup had been saved. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, still trying to process what had happened. Pam smiled gently. "You don't need to. The staff did all the work. I just helped organize it a little. But it was more than just organization. Pam's calm presence had transformed the atmosphere. Staff who had been anxious were now confident. Servers who had been unsure of themselves moved with purpose. Even the bellmen and technicians seemed to anticipate what needed to be done without being told. Pam had quietly instilled a sense of order and clarity that had been missing. The VIP guests entered the hall, unaware of the chaos that had been resolved in the previous hour. They were greeted with an elegant, smoothly functioning setup, everything perfectly arranged. The staff moved efficiently, smiling and attentive, creating an atmosphere of professionalism and warmth. Pam stood at a distance, observing with quiet satisfaction. She did not need recognition. The results spoke for themselves. As the event began, a minor problem arose. One of the microphones on the stage was not working properly. Pam noticed immediately and walked over calmly. She spoke briefly with the technician, suggesting a quick adjustment, and the microphone began working perfectly. The speaker on stage paused briefly, unaware of the intervention, and continued the presentation without issue. Pam's actions throughout the morning had changed the staff's perception of her completely. Where they had once seen just a guest, they now saw someone capable, thoughtful, and quietly commanding respect. Her influence was not forced or loud, but it was undeniable. A server approached her quietly, speaking in a low voice. "I don't know how you do it, but thank you. We would have been overwhelmed without your guidance." Pam shook her head gently. "It wasn't just me. You all did the work. I just helped you see the best way to do it." Still, the staff couldn't help but admire her. There was something about the way she observed, thought, and acted that was different from anyone they had seen before. She didn't impose herself, yet she changed the outcome. She didn't demand attention, yet people noticed her influence. By mid-afternoon, the event was running flawlessly. Guests were engaged, service was seamless, and staff moved with confidence and ease. Pam had anticipated problems before they occurred and resolved them quietly, often without anyone realizing she had been involved. She took a brief moment to step aside and watch the scene unfold. The hall was alive with energy, but it was controlled and pleasant. Staff were smiling, interacting with guests smoothly and handling requests efficiently. The event coordinator, still watching from a corner, finally spoke up. "I don't think I've ever seen someone make such a difference so quietly. She's remarkable." Pam smiled, though softly. She didn't need to hear praise. The satisfaction came from seeing the environment improve and the staff gain confidence. Her actions had not only resolved immediate problems, but had subtly taught the team a way to approach challenges with calm and efficiency. As the event continued, Pam moved among the staff occasionally, offering small suggestions and gentle guidance. A napkin folded slightly differently, a glass placed in a better position, a chair adjusted just enough. Each minor correction added to the overall success. Guests were unaware of the careful orchestration happening behind the scenes, but the difference was clear in the smooth flow of service. Toward the end of the day, the event concluded without any major issues. The VIP guests left satisfied, praising the hotel for its service and elegance. Staff gathered quietly in the back, exchanging relieved smiles and low words of admiration. They had faced challenges, but with Pam's quiet guidance, they had managed everything flawlessly. The event coordinator approached Pam at last, her expression a mix of astonishment and gratitude. I honestly don't know what to say. You came in and everything that seemed impossible, it just worked out. You didn't just help. You changed how we approached the whole situation." Pam shook her head gently. "You all did it. I just noticed a few things and suggested small adjustments. The work was yours, yet the coordinator couldn't hide her amazement." "I underestimated you," she admitted quietly. "I thought you were just a guest. I never expected someone could make such a difference without even taking over." Pam smiled softly. "Sometimes people are underestimated. That doesn't make them less capable. It just means others haven't seen what they can do yet." As Pam walked away, she noticed the subtle shift in the staff's demeanor. Where there had once been doubt and underestimation, there was now respect and awareness. They recognized that she had a way of seeing things they had missed, of acting quietly but effectively, and of improving situations without forcing herself into the spotlight. By the evening, the hotel had returned to its normal rhythm, but the impact of the day was clear. The staff moved with more confidence, aware that small adjustments and thoughtful actions could prevent chaos and create order. They had learned, without being taught, from someone who had quietly guided them through a challenge they had initially thought overwhelming. Pam Bondi returned to her room, tired but satisfied. The day had been a test of patience, observation, and quiet action, and she had succeeded. The hotel staff had begun to understand that she was no ordinary guest. She didn't need recognition or praise. Her work spoke for itself, yet in their subtle glances and whispered words of respect she could feel